Okay, what's up YouTube? So Apple just dropped a new line of AirPods about a week ago, aptly named the AirPods Pro, kind of named after the iPhone 11 Pro. I don't know, whether or not you are a fan of Apple and their products, I think what they do really well is their presentation's incredibly sleek. Because they're very trendy within their design, I think it's good to know how to recreate a lot of the stuff they do. So today we're going to be diving into After Effects, and we're going to try to recreate some of the typography that Apple uses within their ads. Okay, so there's like two main reasons that you'd ever use this typography. And one is if you're personally interested, you're going to use this in some of your own videos. And the second is if you're doing this for commercial work and you're trying to get that Apple aesthetic. Just a bit of a disclaimer though, this is not an overview tutorial for every single part of that video. We're just going to be focusing on typography today. If you want to learn more about how to do the 3D visualizations and some of that cool like product floating through space stuff, I really recommend you check out this tutorial by Derek. I'll link it in the description. It goes over how to model a phone and render it in Eevee. While it's not exactly the same process, it's pretty similar. You just have to model an Airpod instead of an iPhone. But yeah, before we take too long, let's get into it. Okay, real quick, editor here. I would not recommend you start learning After Effects through this tutorial. This is going to be like an intermediate to advanced tutorial. Not because of what we're covering, but just because of how fast we're going to try to get through all this stuff. So if you've never touched After Effects before, or if you're like pretty new, I would recommend not starting with this video. Watch a few other tutorials and then come back to this. Just because I try to go over some of the hotkeys, but a lot of the stuff I just skip over. So I'd expect that like if you're coming into this, you have a general idea of how to use keyframes, how to ease keyframes, how to like drag and drop effects onto your clips, how to pre-compose, that kind of thing. If that all makes sense to you, you're nodding your head, then let's get back into the video. If you haven't, I'd recommend taking a breather, watching some other tutorials, trying stuff out for yourself, and then come back and we'll try it again. Okay, we're in After Effects now. Let's get started. So I have a project file open here with some of the stuff I was working on earlier. The four main ones we're going to be working on are the glitchy one that they show at the beginning of the video. I'll play that real quick. Then we have a dot warp one video. It's kind of that immersive sound style that they have going on. Then we have the whole typography, like super just basic manipulation of text. It's a tapered silicone tips. That's I believe what they have in the video. And then finally, we're just gonna be going over their magic effect. We're gonna kind of cover the magic one. And I think an earlier stage, I think it's in the dot warp one. It's a similar effect to what's going on. So I'll just kind of go over how we're using it in a different way. So let's get started. First we're going to start with the glitch one. So I'm going to make a new composition, 1920 by 1080. I like to lock the aspect ratio, you don't really have to. I don't have music that we're going to be playing along with this, but if you were to have music, you time it up with the music. So I'm just going to have a composition that's about 2 seconds long. I'm going to start with resolution half, just so it pre-renders a bit faster. So to start, we're going to probably be putting these within the music video. So because I want to just make it obvious that we're going to render it out onto a black solid in the background and not transparency, we're going to make a new black solid. We can just call this the background, BG. And now we're going to make a text layer. So right click on this empty dark gray area, go over to new, text, and click text. And we're going to type in active first, just to start, just active. I already have this project saved, but I would just save it now so that you can just periodically do that as you work through. I'm gonna guess that their video is made using Helvetica. Apple seems to have a thing for Helvetica, but I'm on PC, so I don't have that standard, so I'm just gonna use Microsoft Sans Serif. I've noticed it looked pretty similar as far as like just the way that some of the letters are framed. You could probably use Futura or any other kind of simple, sleek kind of font. In this case, I feel like just keeping it simple and pretty similar to what they're using works, but obviously if you're trying to go for if you're trying to individualize yourself a bit and not do exactly what Apple's doing, then I'd recommend choosing something else. Just keep in mind that like super curly cursive fonts will probably look weird. So now we have active. I'm just setting the text tracking to something like 100. Maybe I'll make that actually like 80. It's really just, this is just a look. I noticed that also the text didn't really look like it matched too much when it wasn't bold, so I added a full bold. It's kind of like the fake bold in After Effects. I think it makes it look just a little more close to what it is in the actual video. So I'm just going to drag the anchor point to the center. Doesn't really matter for this one, but I think it's good practice. And I'm going to center all the text layers into the middle of the composition. So let's get going. I'm going to divide this into 3 because we have 3 different areas. So there's active, noise, cancellation. So if we go to the second one and we click on it, and we double click on the text layer with our text tool selected, should be the same as before. We can type active, then noise, and then go over to the third one, double click, cancellation. Okay, so we have our 3 text layers. At the moment, it's just going to cut between the 3, but that's fine. That's exactly what we're looking for. There shouldn't be any other motion. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to drag in our glitch map. The way this effect more or less works is that it's going to displace certain pixels of each of these words by what is determined on this glitch map. So I've made one just with a whole mess of effects, just to distort a few solids and gradients like crazy. I'll put this in the description because this doesn't use stock After Effects plugins, and I had to make this using some random plugins that I had lying around. If you're looking to make these yourself, I would really recommend looking into a pixel sorting plugin or an Omino plugin. I believe the Omino plugin suite is free. They more or less just allow you to mess up images. But we're going to drag this into the bottom. If you have this file, it'll be a video file when I put it in the description, so it'll be like an MP4 or an EVI. I would just recommend bringing this to the bottom. It'll be the same, it'll act the same, and then you can hide it by just clicking off the little eye. Next, we're going to select our active text layer. We're going to go to Effects and Presets, and we're going to look up Displacement Map. And that's good. So now we can go to the Displacement Map settings, the Effect settings, and we're going to go to Displacement Map Layer, and we're going to select the glitch map. And so what this is doing is it takes the values of this glitch map layer and it's moving pixels around. You can kind of see that if I were to show this here, you can see that where these are being displaced is where these certain colors are lining up. So we're going to hide that, bring that back to the bottom. But as we drag these out and get a more drastic result, we can kind of see what we're going for and what Apple is using in their video. Okay, so now that we have that ready, we're going to start animating it. So first I'm going to set both horizontal and vertical displacement to 0. In their video they use mostly horizontal displacement, and it's pretty quick. So what we're going to do is we're going to click this little stopwatch beside the horizontal displacement, max horizontal displacement, maybe like 4 frames before the end. In this case I have 5 frames before the end. It really depends on how much time you have for each of these text layers. Then we're going to go to the second last frame right before it switches, and it's still active, and then we're going to set this to a value like 150. Now we can just go into noise, double click to add a displacement map, and we're going to set these to 0 as well, and set this to glitch map, and we can set this also to 150. So we've made a keyframe and set to 150 on the first frame. Then we can go in maybe 5 again and set this back to 0. And then keep in mind that because the noise is in the middle of the two, it's got to go again. So we're going to set another keyframe a bit later on, maybe 5 from the end. So we can hit U, or we already have it open, and click this little diamond here. That's going to set a new keyframe at 0. And then we're going to go to the second last frame, and we're going to go to, I don't know, let's switch it up the directions time, like -200. Now finally on cancellation, we can do the same thing again. So displacement map, set these both to 0, change cancellation to glitch map, go to max horizontal displacement, and maybe we can try setting this to 200 instead of negative. And then we can go in 5 frames or so, maybe 6, and set this to 0. And we have all our frames set up. So if we play this back, we're getting the idea. So it looks like it's glitching in the right way, but if you notice Apple's video, it's much faster. It's very quick. And the way we're going to achieve this is we're going to select all the keyframes, hit F9, and we're going to ease them. So we're going to get a whole bunch of curves if we select the different keyframe sets. And the way we're going to work is that this is over time, This is the amount of effect that's taking place. And we're going to set these to something that looks more like an exponential curve. So if we ease it like this, we'll notice that there's very little effect, and then it very quickly ramps up to the max. So if we have that for the first one, we're just going to select the next group of keyframes and get this next curve. And then we're going to drag each of these corner Bezier poles to make more exponential curves. And finally, we'll do the same with the last one. Just remember that as they're entering, you want it to be quickly entering and then quickly decelerate, and then the opposite for when it's starting up again. So if we look, we're more or less done. This is a really quick effect. And there you go. So if we have it in full resolution, you'll see a bit more of the displacement that's going on. But I'd say that looks good. And as to not make this tutorial take way too long, let's move on real quick. Okay, so new composition, 1920 by 1080p. Let's go. So this one is definitely going to be one of the more complicated ones, just because of how much there is going on. So we're going to make a new solid. We're going to go BG, and we're going to create a new text layer, and let's call this immersive. Whoops. Then let's go about halfway through, maybe a bit more, and we're going to cut this in half, and we're going to say for immersive sound, I believe that's what it says. For your computer's sake, we're going to pre-compose the immersive sound, or the immersive layer, and then we're going to drag the immersive sound layer over maybe 1 or 2 frames, and then pre-compose that one as well. There's a reason we're doing this, and we'll get back to it in a bit. So if we enter the immersive pre-composition, then we can see just the layer that we have. What we're going to do is we're going to set up the basic animation here. So we're going to hit the scale, and it starts a bit bigger. Actually, let's go to this pan behind anchor tool, and we're going to turn on snapping, and we're just going to drag this in the middle so it scales from the center. Now we're going to scale this up a bit, and then we're going to scale to make a keyframe at the end at about the same size, and then about halfway through we're going to make it bigger. So if we select all the keyframes, hit F9, and ease them in that same exponential way, we're going to get what looks like a kind of bouncing up motion. It looks like you're watching someone on a trampoline from above, and that's kind of what we want. So we're going to take this, and we're going to make a new solid below it, and we're going to make a new effect, and we're going to type in radio waves. And generate radio waves, we're going to hit that, and we're going to notice we have some blue rings that start spiraling up from the center. Let's make them white, and then let's also set the start and end width to something like 50, maybe even higher, like 100. And what we're also going to do is we're going to set the expansion to maybe something higher, like 20, and maybe frequency a bit higher, just so we have a few more of them. And then what we're going to do finally is we're going to take the entire layer and we're going to drag it out the side of the composition, and then drag the end over a bit, just so that when it starts the beginning of the composition, we have waves that are in the screen already. So pretty simple, pretty simple. If you couldn't figure out what we're doing right now, what we're doing is we're setting up a background to warp something with. So if you look in the actual video, I'll put a little excerpt of it here. We're going to see this pattern of kind of rings that are like bulging out of these dots that kind of go across the screen. So that's exactly what we're setting up here. Finally, what we're going to do is we're going to make one more solid. We're going to call this circle. And we're going to drop this below immersive as well. And then we're going to go effects and presets and circle. And that's just going to generate the circle. And we're going to scale it up decently large, maybe like a radius of 300. Click the radius button, and we're going to do a similar thing. So we're going to hit U to show all our keyframes, make one more keyframe at the end for radius, and then about halfway through, we're going to make it a bit bigger. And then we're going to do the exact same thing. So it's kind of scaling up with the text. So we're going to set those Bezier curves, and there you go. So now all we have to do is make one more black solid, as the background matte, and we're gonna start blurring stuff. So immersive, because we don't ever want every edge to be very sharp, we're gonna start adding some fast blur. So fast blur, we're gonna add this on immersive, and maybe set this to 15. That looks good. Not repeat edge pixels. For circle, we're gonna set this to, let's just hide everything else, maybe like 50. For the rings, we're gonna set this to maybe also like 50, maybe even higher, like 100. And then for the background, we're not gonna set it to anything. So the background, we're gonna hit a fill. We're gonna type in fill and drop a generate fill over it. And we're gonna set this to like a very light gray. Pretty close to white, but not quite. And we're gonna do the exact same for both the radio waves, which we're gonna set to a slightly lighter gray, but not white. And we're also gonna do the same for the circle. So another very light gray, maybe almost white, but not quite white. And we're gonna notice that it's gonna kind of shape up. For the circle, we can screen. Actually, maybe not. So now we have this kind of cool, glowing, wavy look. We're gonna pre-compose this all, and we're gonna call this map. And we're gonna drag this out to the end, so we have a proper map. And we're gonna make a new solid, and we're gonna call this dots. And on dots, we're gonna type in the effects and presets card dance. And that's going to make... Okay, so I figured out what we're supposed to be doing. We're gonna drop in a fill, and we're gonna make this white. And then we're gonna drop in a new solid and make this black. And then we're gonna we're gonna put the black behind the dots, and we're gonna hide the map layer. So on the dots layer, we're gonna set this to maybe your composition size, so 1920, and then we're gonna divide this by 4, and then maybe 1080, also divided by 4. We might have to make this slightly larger in the future. Now, intensity 1, we have set as, we have the source under Z position set as intensity 1. 1 as a multiplier is fine. And then under X scale and Y scale, we're going to turn the multiplier offset down to 0.8 or so, just so that it separates all the dots. Let's give that a look. If we set that to full, how does it look? Maybe that's a bit too many dots. So we can maybe... Or we can make these even smaller, maybe 0.5 and 0.5 instead. That's looking better. 1920 divided by maybe 6 or so. 1080 divided by 6. Maybe we could divide this by actually double the amount, or near, just so we have more dot-shaped dots. We can kind of see what we're getting at though. So if we're going back to half, it's more or less creating a whole bunch of dots that are reacting in Z position to the white behind it. So things that are white are going to be are going to be pushed forwards, and things that aren't are not going to be. Which means that if we don't like how it looks, we can just edit the map. So if we go back to the map layer, and let's set this to B, and trim comp to work area, we can go to the lowest black solid and maybe make that a bit darker. Let's maybe get here, this kind of gray. It'll make the ball just stand out a bit more. And then maybe we can make the circle that's below it a little bit darker, just so the text stands out a bit more. I'd say that looks pretty good. Maybe we can make it a bit smaller even. So we can go to U, select that middle keyframe, because this is the big one. We can just drag this down. Now it'll be a bit smaller. And this will all update in our pre-composition and in our main parent composition without the dots. So it kind of looks like it's rippling. I'd say that's pretty good. That's kind of what we wanted. So we can close this, and we'll see that in our other composition we have this ready. And the nice thing about having these in compositions is that once it's rendered one, if we make any adjustments to this composition, it'll simply make those adjustments over this pre-cached layer. So it doesn't really have to worry about re-rendering it each time. It just saves it in your RAM, and then we'll edit over top of it, which is nice. It means that it just saves us some time. and a bit of computer resources. So we have this immersive layer. Now we got to transition to this immersive sound. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to open up immersive sound. We're going to add in a black solid, and we're going to start doing some effects with this. So we're going to scale it in first. So if we hit scale and we also drag this back to the center, yours should be centered by default. Mine just isn't. We can scale this up to maybe 136 and then scale this down to maybe 100 by the end. And we'll do that same easing that we did with the keyframes earlier. So we have that kind of very sudden jolt in. Then we can add an adjustment layer. Actually, maybe not even. Then we can add a CC lens. And we're going to set this to something near the edges. Just about there. And then hit size. And we're also going to keyframe size out to like something a bit larger. We want a bit of that like lens distortion around it, but not too much. Let's do the same with the keyframes, so it's kind of easing out really quick. That's exactly what we want. Now we can leave this composition, and over here we can just head into the effects and presets, type in linear, actually no, sorry, Luma key. It'll use the obsolete one, and now we can key out brighter, and we'll see that it kind of makes all our whites go away. But that's not exactly what we want. If you look in the video, it slightly blends in, so we're going to set the threshold near the top, and then we're going to move it down a bit, and then we're going to turn up the edge feather. And the edge thin, we're going to turn down, so it just kind of fills in it a bit. And now, with the tolerance, we can just keyframe from 0, or 232 to 235, to kind of hide to it. But actually, you know what, let's keep this down a bit lower, just so we can actually kind of see through it. Okay, so actually, my mistake. We don't even need to, you can keep this at 0 at the beginning. And then keyframe this to 255, and then as long as we have the edge feather at about 20, and the edge thin about -5, it'll look like it's kind of passing through. So you can see the dots through it. That looks good. Now, one final effect that we're going to do is we're going to kind of make this immersive look like it's really zooming out. So we're going to take a warp. Sorry, we're actually going to make a new adjustment layer. And then we're going to drag it below the second composition. And we're going to use Control-Shift-D to split it on both ends. And then we can go to warp, which is here. Distort, mesh warp. You should have less options than I do. Go to warp style fisheye. And then we're going to go from fisheye from 0, make a keyframe, all the way to maybe -80. We're going to open that up in U, select both our keyframes, F9, same idea. We're going to ease it in or out. So it's going to kind of, if we turn on motion blur later, it's going to kind of pull out hard. In fact, what we could do is we could even have this not take on so much effect here and maybe be a bit more dramatic before it leaves the screen. So we're just going to move the adjustment layer over. At this point, people won't really notice what's behind in the background layer because it's more or less obscured by this text anyways. So that's nice. So we have immersive for immersive sound. I'd say that looks pretty good. We can probably move on. Okay, for the final part, we're going to be doing the mostly typography related stuff. I've just set up a new composition in the exact same way, background layer in the exact same way, just because it's rather repetitive otherwise. We're going to make a new text layer, and we're going to put in tapered with an uppercase T, I believe. And then we're going to cut this at a certain point, and then we're going to do silicon. Silicon. And then we're going to cut this again, and we're going to make tips. The tips part I'm not going to cover, just because it's just this layer scaling up with some keyframes. But the tapered silicon part we're going to cover right now. So tapered, it scales up first. So we're going to make a keyframe for scale at 100. We're going to drag this over a bit, and we're going to set this to like 80. Actually, before we do that, one more time, because my text layer centers seem to be off. The anchor points seem to be there we go. That looks better. Once again, you probably won't have to do this. But scale 80, select both your keyframes, F9, we're gonna do that same easing, except we're gonna make it a bit more dramatic, just so it's a bit faster. Maybe even drag this over, but keep that kind of same idea. So we're gonna go back into the graph editor, we're gonna keep it harsh, tapered. Now we're gonna warp. So we're gonna take a keyframe about here, we're gonna make it go into FX and presets, and hit warp, type in warp, grab our distort warp again, we're gonna set bend to 0, keep it on arc, and we're gonna use the vertical distortion to kind of get that tapered look. So we're gonna go click keyframe for vertical distortion, go to the second last keyframe, and maybe I think it was like 100, nope, negative 100. Hit U, select your keyframes, F9, same deal. So most of this is the same kind of easing. Now finally we're gonna go into our effects and presets again, type in transform, we're gonna double click on distort transform, and we're gonna uncheck uniform scale and do scale width. So that's gonna be at 100 by default. We're gonna make a keyframe for that at the beginning of our animation, and then go to the second last keyframe of that text layer, and we're gonna go, I don't know, like 80% maybe. That looks pretty good. Something so that the entire thing scales in. Now hit U, select your keyframes again, F9, same idea. So we're just easing them out again. Then in Silicon, we're going to right click. Actually, first what we're going to do is we're going to go animate, tracking, and then we're going to go tracking from 0, not tracking type. We're just going to keyframe tracking at 0 to tracking at, I don't know, some later keyframe, maybe at like 50. Nope, not 50, 5, 10. 10 looks pretty good. Select those, F9, easy ease. This should not be new. And now we're going to right click on Silicon, we're going to go create shapes from text, and those are not doing their thing. So you know what, actually to make this easier, we're just going to uncheck the scale box when we're going into scale. We're going to click a scale icon, we're going to set the width, so the first one to like 80, and then we're going to go out to like some farther keyframes, set that to 100. It doesn't have to be super obvious what we're doing here. Same thing, easy ease. I'd say that looks good. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to open up, using this little drop down arrow, the Silicon outlines. We're going to go to the add button, click the arrow beside it, and hit offset paths. This is what we're going to get to have that kind of text warping look. So we're going to set this initially to maybe like -5, something super thin. We're going to click a keyframe for amount. This is at the very beginning. And then about the same keyframe, we're maybe going to set this to like 2. I want it to be a bit thicker, just because it kind of gives it a look, maybe 3 even. Select those keyframes, F9. Same idea, easy ease, or sorry, same idea, we're going to ease them like this. Something is not, oh, right, our scale somehow got reset when I selected it. Don't select your scale keyframes, and that won't happen. So, now we have the tapered silicon tips part. Look and fly. Now it's just one more, real quick. We're gonna make a new composition. Solid, background, you get the drill, BG. Let's make one more, and this is just gonna be how we do the magic part, because it uses a similar effect as something we've done earlier already. I cannot spell. Magic, there we go. We're gonna do the same idea, center this anchor point. If yours is not centered, scale it up pretty big, scale it down to something smaller, like 100%, maybe a bit bigger. Select your keyframes, F9, easy ease. So we're gonna have that kind of easing out. That is way too much. So we could even turn that down, like that. I just realized our composition is also ridiculously long for just one effect. So we're gonna shrink the composition by dragging it over, right click, and hit trim comp to length or something. F9, drag these down, magic. So we have that. Once again, we're gonna use CC lens. So type in CC lens. The only difference is that rather than starting from a large value, we're gonna start from a really small value. So maybe like 10 or 11. And we're gonna keyframe that from 11 to like 130, where it's not recognizable. F9, once again, easy ease. So the way this is working is it's kind of doing this cool bulging effect, and in their video, I believe the magic text is bigger the entire time. So if you want, what we could do is we could just select all of this and drag it up holding shift so that the entire text layer is just bigger. We're probably going to have to make the convergence size a lot bigger just so we don't see that distortion, like 400, and then drag that easing keyframe up. And then maybe we should have it less dramatic initially. So we can maybe even just turn off easing. Yeah, or maybe just turn this down. And there we go, that looks pretty good. Alternatively, you could maybe use a turbulent displace, but I think it'd be harder to get the same effect with that. So, without further ado, we're now done. It's a bit of a rush, a bit of a quick effect, but I think it looks good. And I think you could easily tweak some of the ways that we're doing this to make it look original and cool. The idea is just to kind of get across what techniques they're using, and how we can really use just like effect layers and certain like distort effects on text, and it works really well because there's a lot of possibilities with that kind of stuff. We only scratched the surface of the many things you can do with the distort plugins. But they're all stock as well, which is absolutely beautiful. So, yeah, I'll see you next time. Hopefully you stuck around to the end, and take care.